Good morning, everybody. We're starting to have folks coming into the meeting here, so just bear with us for a couple of minutes while we make sure everybody that's in the virtual waiting room finds their way into the meeting. So we'll get started here in another couple of minutes. I would start humming hold music at you, but I will spare you that for the moment.
Timothy, I want to hear you sing.
I will indulge you later, but I see a cat on screen, so that's sort of something that must be acknowledged. Is that Benjamin? Do you have your cat present?
Hi, yes, my cat's always present.
All right. So what is your cat's name?
Oh, that's Daenerys. We may see Lucky also. They rule the house. I pay the rent here, but they own the place.
I understand. I'm unfortunately in the office today. If I was working from home, you might get to meet Jack. He is known internationally. So it's good to meet Damaris. So, all right, for those of you just joining, we're gonna go another minute before we start as we make sure everybody gets their way into the meeting. So everybody hang tight. So I'm going to date myself again, who's playing the role of Ed McMahon for this morning's version of the Tonight Show. Have we cleared the waiting room? Okay, so thumbs up from Dan. We're at 9:02, so we're going to go ahead and get started. And yes, I'm off mute. So welcome everybody to our stakeholder meeting on electric vehicle readiness, focusing on UDC amendment proposals on the commercial and multifamily residential side of the house. And so I'm Tim Tomyer. I'm Assistant City Manager. I am also currently serving as the Interim Director of PDSD. Wearing both of those hats today. I'm wearing the PDSD hat, and we'll go through some background information very briefly. We'll present to you, we had a comment portal open for the previous week, and we'll go through what comments just at a very high level were submitted. And then we'll go into a discussion for folks on the call who would like to provide additional feedback or even reinforce the feedback you've already provided. And we'll run that through use of the chat function, but also hand raising or whatever other virtual tools are at our disposal. The goal is to be able to at least give you all a chance to share your perspectives and information. And so if you want to speak, let's try going into the chat, put your name in the chat, or say, I have something I want to say. You don't have to put everything in the chat, but just let us know you want to come in. We'll work our way down through the chat and hand raising, and hopefully it doesn't turn into chaos. But either way, we'll make sure you're heard today. So without further ado, let's go into the background section. Next slide. So this is just a reminder of the electric vehicle roadmap adopted by Mayor and Council in April of 2021. Bring this up for a couple of reasons. One is it was brought up from members of the public at our last Mayor and Council meeting on July 12th, where the public hearing on these topics was closed and concluded, but the direction was to come back out and do this additional round of stakeholder input. And it's important to note that under the short-term window, the 1 to 2 year window, there's support for public charging station installation. There's also talks about incentives and then mandates for charging infrastructure. The reason I bring it up is twofold. One is what we're talking about today is definitely on the roadmap, and we are looking at mandates that would be part of what's being recommended by the city manager. When we get toward the end, I'll talk about how we are proposing to handle the incentive side of that equation. And so we are definitely following our roadmap. So we are on a path as established by mayor and council by going down the electric vehicle path, the roadmap. The other thing I want to point out, and it's sort of a good news for the community moment, is because of the work we've done in the EV space, partially because we have this roadmap, partially because of the actions we've taken previously as a community. Today, there will be an announcement that the city of Tucson and SunTran and DEP will be receiving a $12.1 million grant from the federal government under the Low No Emissions Bus Program. This will be getting us 10 additional electric buses for our fleet and charging infrastructure associated with that. So when we talk about the importance of not only having good policy in place, but good planning and good execution, the proof is in the pudding. And so I just wanted to let everybody know that good news, that 12.1 million additional dollars is coming to Tucson because of these efforts. This is on top of, if you were following us yesterday, we received a $25 million federal grant to contributing toward the replacement of the 22nd Street Bridge. So we are doing the right things here in Tucson, and it's being acknowledged, and it's actually being rewarded in the form of funding, specifically in the EV space, based on what we're going to hear later today. Next slide. This is a reminder of where we started on the 12th. It's been a long journey to get to the 12th of July. We'll reflect back on that toward the end when we look at kind of where we are in the overall schedule of this discussion. But this is what the city manager's recommendation was on the 12th of July. I'm not going to go through it in too much detail because I think you're all on this call for a reason. You're familiar with it and you wanted to give comment on it. But that's the starting point. We recommended a total of 25% some form of EV preparedness in multifamily with 20% conduit, 5% outlets. In the office area, it was 20% with 5% outlets and the rest in conduit. And then the retail, 15% total with 5% stations and 10% conduit. So the retail requirements kick in when you're at 100 spaces or larger. So that's the proposal. That's what you're reacting to, and that's what was taken to council, and they requested this additional outreach. Next slide. Again, we had the conclusion of the public hearing on the 12th, but no vote was taken in order to have this, or no vote was taken on the EV readiness portion. They did vote and approve the individual parking plan components. And so our direction was come back on August 23rd with the updates of this stakeholder outreach. Next slide. So we did conduct the online survey and we received 64 total responses over that week-long period. Just generally looking at the overall content of those 64 responses, 14 of those responses tended toward suggesting that the EV proposal is too aggressive. And we'll go through some of the more detailed comment around those 14 who commented that it's too aggressive. 24 tended to just say it's an appropriate response for where we are today. So there was agreement with the recommendation of the city manager. And then 26 were that it's too conservative or not aggressive enough, or however you want to phrase that we should have a higher level of requirements or mandates in the proposal than what is shown. So that's the general flavor of the comment. Mostly that it's either appropriate or it's not aggressive enough, but still a number who are saying that it's too aggressive. So let's peel that back a little bit and look at the reasons people proposed. So next slide. So generally regarding EVs in Tucson, so, how many EVs do we have? How mature is the market? Things of that nature. So 16 of the respondents, and we didn't pick from a list or anything like that. It was very open. It was, give us your comments. So 16 said something along the lines of these requirements will make EV transition easier by removing barriers. Another 10 drew the connection to the city's climate goals. 8 indicated that Tucson will be a leader instead of falling behind. 5 indicated these actions would support the local economy. And there were 2 comments that the Tucson EV market has not yet matured. Next slide. So in the category of costs, fewer comments in this general area overall, but 4 mentions that there would be future cost savings available considering gas prices. So cost of EV ownership versus gas price ownership, and that future cost savings considering retrofits are 300% more expensive. So by mandating it on new construction, when things are first going into the ground, there's a cost savings relative to having to go in and retrofit a parking lot or an area for EV readiness. There were 2 comments that this is added costs to construction during the housing crisis. Next slide. There was comment around technology. This also, all of these themes came up on the 12th, but there was a fair amount of discussion of technology. So there were 4 comments that charging stations will soon be obsolete. 2 comments that there were no industry standards for charging components, but 2 comments that say that vehicle battery tech may change, but not conduit and outlets. So just again, there are kind of 3 different types of EV preparedness. There's conduit, there's the outlets, and then there's the charging stations. I'll just note that the charging stations appear only in one of the 3 categories as a mandate. Next slide. So would there be any suggested changes or exemptions to proposed requirements? So reflecting back to the city manager's recommendation, there are 11 folks that said that there should be higher requirements for multifamily, including stations. 6 saying that there should be more retail sites. In other words, remove or lower the 100 space threshold. There was some comment that said there should be no required stations in retail conduit only. And then a comment, add more conduit in all uses. There was comment about adding an in-lieu fee option, which I'll come back to on a future slide, specifically among other topics. There was a comment about, and we kind of labeled these as neutral, as allow a grandfather period before January 1, 2023. So even if it's adopted on the 23rd of August, giving a grace period or a grandfather period on new construction until January 1. I'll pause there for a second just to indicate that in this case, which I believe is in all cases, but certainly I can reiterate it for this case, that if a development or a permit or a development plan is already in the hopper and these requirements are imposed, we're not going to go back on things that are already in the process and say, now you have to add this, regardless of whether you go to construction before or after January 1. So we would begin to hold folks accountable to these requirements with any new applications that come in after the adoption. So it's just more, I understand the desire to have some certainty and also I will acknowledge that we know we have some time frame issues in our reviews that we're working on. So we don't certainly want to cost you weeks and redesign if you are already in the system and already moving through under the existing rules. Then the last one was that one comment that there should be no EV charging requirements in affordable housing. Next slide. All right, so that's the flavor of the comment. We're going to also, hear from you on today's call. We'll get into that into a moment. but I wanted to just give my reflection on what we heard. We saw it at the very beginning, and then we saw throughout. There tended to be a lot of support for either the existing or to be more aggressive. That showed up in the overall comment, and that also showed up in the specific comments. There were a number of specific points on all sides of that discussion that I think we can address. And by address, I mean, I'm going to talk about that in this slide because there's what's going to be presented back to council on the 23rd and either adopted or not, or modified. And then there's what happens after that. If there's a package of mandates or requirements that are adopted, if a program does exist after the meeting on the 23rd, we are proposing, and we will do a one-year evaluation of that program. And I think in this 12-month review, we'll be able to address a lot of the concerns across the spectrum with respect to EV requirements and EV readiness. So first of all, looking at technological advances and local EV adoption rates. So I'll pause and just say part of the reason to have a program like what's being proposed is to support EV adoption by removing barriers to EV ownership. So one way there's the current market and how people are able to access EV or not today. And then we'll be looking at, does this move the needle? Does this change people's accessibility? And we're only one of many things. There's the different models available. Can you even buy a car today? Things of that nature. But are we contributing toward removing barriers to EV adoption? And then also, what is the pace of this technology change? Conduit hasn't changed in a long time. Outlets really haven't changed in a long time. What you put on the end of an outlet could change, but that is a minor component relative to the conduit, the wire, and all the things that feed an outlet. And then there's some discussion about, you have certain types of chargers. If you put in a charging station that's for Tesla, can others access it, and vice versa? And we also know that you have means to do so. And we also know that dynamic and market is changing. But it doesn't mean that charging stations per se are either going to be present or not present in the future. It's just what goes into that charging station that might change. Or how do you access it if you have one type of vehicle and the charging that's provided is a different type of vehicle? All of those things are generally resolved or resolvable. Explore additional components of EV programs such as an in-lieu fee or other options. This could be incentives. This could be a number of things. I'll state that will be, from my perspective, a primary target for evaluation and recommendation during this 12-month period. We acknowledge that there will be situations where across the board requirements are either difficult to meet, or there might be a better outcome if we did that investment somewhere else in the community. So an in-lieu program, I think, is something that we can evaluate. I think we can calculate and quantify, and we can bring back to the council in a year's time and say, from our lessons learned and what we've observed, this is an in-lieu program that you could offer or acknowledge or approve if you want. Ultimately, it'll be up to mayor and council to make that decision. But I think it's compatible with other ways we approach requirements like this, where taking that money that would be paid in lieu of installing it on the specific property that's being evaluated could have a benefit or a pooled cumulative outcome. Review the number of sites with EV infrastructure and distribution across the city. Okay, how many of these are getting installed? How is that distributed across the city? I will relate that back to the previous bullet that, and as noted by folks at the public hearing, is since this is focused on new construction, what are we doing about existing sites and retrofits? How do we monitor the deployment of EV through this ordinance relative to where do we need it, and how do we fill that gap. Okay, and survey property owners who have installed EV on usage patterns and any issues. Again, monitoring and tracking, and then ultimately reporting back with changes, if any. And I'll just highlight for you the in-lieu fee is one that I think has a lot of merit, and we'll certainly do a thorough review of that. Next slide. Back to where we started, city manager's recommendation. This is what we're reacting to today. Next slide. This is the timeline of this overall conversation, which dates back to summer of 21. We did all the initial research analysis meetings, public meetings, draft proposals. We went through the planning commission. They actually, a staff recommendation at that time was slightly different than what the city manager's current recommendation is. But planning commission voted unanimously to support that. We came to the mayor and council in spring with the start of the public hearing. They asked for additional outreach at that time and continued the public hearing. So we conducted additional public meetings, and we did refine our recommendation, or the manager's recommendation, to be what we've shown on the screen here and what we presented on the 12th of July. They've concluded the public hearing, but they have asked for this additional input period, and it'll be coming back to mayor and council on the 23rd of this month. So next slide. All right, so we are at the pivot point where I will start to work our way through chat/comment period. So I'm going to roll to the top of the chat. Okay, there's a project recommendation. I'm going to hold that for now. There's a comment from Robert. And if when I get to the end, if I haven't come back to Benjamin and his cats, let me know. But I want to hold the product for a moment, if I could. Let's go to Robert and talking about your information you posted about electric vehicles, if you'd like to speak to it.
Oh, just kind of 2 points to make is that I thought that KPMG study of current legacy auto executives, that they're expecting 50% of new car sales to be all electric by 2030 was quite credible. Everything I read is consistent with that, and other countries are way ahead of us. So my point being that within the 20-year lifetime or 30-year lifetime of any new parking lots, we're going to need a lot more outlets or stations than anything we recommend in the study. So to me, this is largely about trying to reduce the cost of future retrofits. You know, I've been making the point that we're in the midst of a technology transition, and the big issue here, I think, is that right now there's just a huge roadblock for anybody that doesn't own their own carport or garage, you know, namely multifamily and rentals. It's just made much more difficult for anybody that wants to go electric to not have that charging at home. So we need to have convenient and inexpensive charging available to people who don't own their own homes. That's just vital if we're going to move forward. And the other comment I wanted to make was just that on technology transitions, basically, I think that's a huge red herring. Fact is, I posted that the Transportation Administration says that the average Arizona driver, you know, is like 26 miles, or 36 miles a day. And when you're trying to replenish that much energy, that's like 10 kilowatt hours. You don't need anything fancy. There's no technology change necessary for any of that. You know, and a 120 volt outlet will work fine 80-90% of the time. A 240 volt outlet works all the time, you know, if you're going to be in a spot for 3 or 4 hours. To replenish 36 miles is, you know, 1 hour of charging. So it's a complete misdirection to try to say that there is a technology change coming. What the technology change we need is an outlet at every parking spot a car spends an hour or more at. And, you know, that's not as true for DC fast chargers on freeways. Their powers keeps going up, and the cars are increasing in their ability to take the power. But that's not an issue either, because the charging connector standards have been set. And, you know, I expect that within the next year or so, there will be good interoperability through adapters. Tesla has said they're going to allow CCS cars to charge at Tesla's superchargers, and they're already selling a CCS adapter for Teslas in South Korea that's supposed to come to the States very soon. So, you know, technology change is not an issue. What we need are electricity at parking spaces. That's it.
Thank you, Robert. Corin Manning posted a link to our website for information on some of our FAQs, so feel free to peruse that. So I think, Robert, you had another comment in there, but I think you covered that, the difference, you know, what type of outlets and what they provide to us. So I'm gonna consider your comment as also spoken. Russell Lowe's, you have a comment in the chat about the no requirement, or that the comment that there should be no requirement for affordable housing. And then you talk about the consequences of that. So Russell, would you like to oh, I see you've unmuted. Okay, go ahead, Russell.
Yeah, I'd like, to me, this would be similar to, say, in the early 1900s, saying we are not going to hook up low-income housing to phone lines because it would cost them more to pay for phone service, basically keeping them from advancing, you know, with communications. In this case, we should be putting more requirements on low income to bring people up in economic connection and economic strengths. There should be no reduction, and maybe even an increase in the requirements for low-income housing for electric vehicle hookups. And I've been noticing that a lot of electric vehicles that are new are costing in the 20,000s now, which is what a typical ICE or internal combustion engine is costing. And you can buy them used now for under $20,000. So low-income people will have access to electric vehicles. If we don't make the connections available to them at a high rate, it will keep them down economically. We need to boost their ability to go up economically. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. It looks like you got an agreed in the chat there. So real-time feedback there for you. Acacia did post another link to the project page. So I've scrolled to the bottom of the chat as we have it so far. So I'm going to go back up to the top, Benjamin, and your cat.
Well, what I put in there was a link to a product called Orange Outlet. And one of the folks that's on my EV Tucson list advanced this just the other day. And I think it addresses some concerns, I think, that the realtors would have. Gosh, you're asking me to put outlets in here. 240 volt 50 amp is, great, but it might be overkill. And Robert even said here that, most of the time, 120 volt outlets are fine. And here's a product that's basically an electric outlet with Wi-Fi connectivity. Whoever pulls up would plug in and tap something on their cell phone. And there would be metering. I'm sure the apartment complex managers are concerned with who's using this electricity. Is someone going to just walk out there and plug a a light in one evening just to draw power for the heck of it or whatever. Here it is metered for you, and these outlets come in 120 volt and 240 volt varieties. And the 240 volt is less robust than the 50 amp current flow. It's 20 amp or 16 continuous. And that puts, according to their statistics on a typical EV, about 15 miles of charge on per hour, which I think is fabulous. I mean, I wish I had that at home. That's also one of the folks that was, I think, one of the city electricians was concerned that having 3 120 volt 50 amp outlets in a typical apartment installation would require a major upgrade on the service panel. And I think that this is a solution that gives you that 240 volt connectivity at a lower amperage. And I don't think there's, there shouldn't be a significant upgrade or any upgrade needed really on the service panel to utilize something like this. So there's just something I found out about recently that I think, might be a good solution for folks that are, realtors and building managers who are worried about how am I going to, pay for this, or how am I going to be able to effectively bill for the electricity used. So that's really what I'm putting out there.
Okay. Thank you for your comment. Back down to the end of the chat. We have a link to used EVs for sale starting at 5,000. So thank you for those of you who may be in the market. Okay, so we have a new comment from Kevin James about how success be measured, EV adoption rates, or maybe something else. Pretty clear question, but Kevin, did you want to unmute?
And just curious, if you're looking, probably more measures than that too. I don't know what the city might be interested in about placement or usage or pick up an EV adoption rate or something like that. But how do we know it's working, a year, 2 years, 3 years out?
Okay, thank you. I will start with my perspective on it. I will invite Dan or Acacia or Corin to weigh in if they'd like to add to that. But I think we would be looking at minimum at a couple things. One is we mentioned that we would be monitoring usage of the spots themselves. That's one, and that'll be feedback from the operators of the multifamily housing units or the residential or commercial, or the commercial or the office retail. So we want to make sure that as these are being deployed, we're doing what we can to work with our stakeholders to see how frequently are they occupied. That'd be one, and that can be possibly measured by observation, but also by if we're metering energy use or things of that nature. There might be like real-time ways of knowing how much charging occurred. One would be another, and with the world of GIS that we've been in the last 20 years now, the geographic distribution of things is really something important, because then we can clearly identify underserved areas of the community, which may not be addressed even through this program unless we end up developing an in-lieu approach, but can be addressed by other means. And then I think generally keeping an eye on the overall presence and market of EV vehicles in Tucson. And I think we have ways of measuring and monitoring that. Dan or Acacia, is there anything you'd like to add to that? I'm getting a, where's Acacia? I got a no from Dan.
I just want to mention that what is nice is that it kind of correlates with our new permitting system, which also allows for more robust monitoring. So that'll help with that whole process as we move forward with this.
Thanks, Dan. Acacia?
I think one other component might be best practices for design. And there's already resources out there about where to put the chargers within a lot, like maybe not near the front because of the way that competition for spaces plays out. But also getting feedback about that along the way will paint a bigger picture for what's best practices.
Thanks, Acacia. Okay, Does that answer, Kevin?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you for the question. I have a hand up from Karen Potter.
Hi, Timothy. This is Karen Potter with SWEEP, Southwest Energy Efficiency Project. I just wanted to add to the previous question. I think there are a number of different metrics that the city of Tucson can track to understand utilization rates of chargers, and as well as just general adoption, because when we're looking at the recommendations in front of what we see on the screen here, in many ways, this is kind of the minimum that's required to jumpstart and get the process started. Because I think the big difference in these percentages, right, are the difference between just putting the pre-wiring into the wall of a building, right, during the pre-construction phase to ensure that a charger can be built and installed in the future. And some of these bare minimum requirements are absolutely critical to ensure equal access in the future. As we get more used electric vehicles on the market and available for people, which are coming, and more vehicles are starting to get circulated into these markets, more people are going to have access to this technology as more adopters are getting more electric vehicles. And if they don't have places to charge in all different types of buildings, it's going to create an inequitable situation when it comes to the ability to charge. And that's going to be a huge issue even in the next three years, more than likely. So when it comes to identifying, what is success when it comes to these codes or these recommended provisions that you see in front of you today, I think there are a number of things that we can kind of incorporate in terms of looking at what success looks like. For example, the city of Tucson can look at, percent of market share of electric vehicles in Arizona and also within the region as a whole to kind of see, what's helping to bring on more electric vehicle adoption. And even just in the last year and a half of looking at Arizona's market share, we've jumped from 12th in the nation to growth in EV market share to 7th in the nation for EV market share. So the jump is already happening considerably, and it's going to continue to increase precipitously if we have more access to charging in these building types that you see on the screen here. So I just wanted to add, those are a couple of things that we can do. And also with the onslaught of some of the opportunities from the federal stimulus coming into Arizona when it comes to corridor charging, that's going to help to make more drivers in Tucson feel like they can get their range anxiety reduced and they have access to charging no matter where they go. And this part of the puzzle, or the code element of this, is really critical to finalizing that puzzle and confirming that everyone, has that access that they need. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Karen. Appreciate your comments. And we have an additional comment in the chat from Russell. So I know we've heard from you once already, Russell, but you have a new comment that you've entered. So would you like to address that?
Sure. For those who don't know, Community Choice Energy is in 10 states right now and covering 20-30 million people in the United States. And Community Choice Energy helps communities switch to, well, at this point, up to 80% renewable energy by some CCEs, or community choice energy systems. And what it does is it gets the city, it allows the city to take over the sourcing of power from Tucson Electric Power, but it has to be authorized by the state. 10 states have already authorized it, and we're asking the city of Tucson to push to get a resolution to push the Arizona Corporation Commission to do a feasibility study for CCE. And if they can do the feasibility study, this will show basically that renewable energies can be transitioned to much more quickly under a CCE than the snail's pace of TEP. TEP, after all this talk about being pro-solar, is at 10% solar energy as of 2021, the latest data. And they should be at 60, 70, 80% by now. And a CCE can get there within 5 years to 80% and closer to 100% within 10 years. So I'm just asking, can the city just do this simple step of asking the Corporation Commission to do a feasibility study on CCE?
Okay. All right, thank you for your comment. I will address it. I'm going to address it by acknowledging it. I'm also going to say that the city is currently in the process of doing a climate action and adaptation plan. That plan will be completed by the end of the calendar year. And I can acknowledge that at least an evaluation, well, energy is a big part of a climate action plan. I guess we can sort of take that as a given. But an assessment of that path to renewables, carbon net neutrality, things of that nature, and this it being a tool that could be evaluated is going to be addressed in the climate action plan. So I just want to acknowledge it and say there's a process separate from this EV UDC code amendment process by which that comment will be carried forward.
Thanks.
Welcome. All right, let's see. Fingers. So Benjamin had, oh, wait, sorry, I skipped Rob. Let's see. How will so from Rob East, how will DSD assess a commercial subdivision for the amount of infrastructure by lot or entire site? You're in the next level of weeds. I know I've talked about this with the team for me to better understand it, but I will phone a friend to either Dan or Acacia or Corin if you want to give a better explanation than I would provide. Because my explanation will be we'll ask you to propose something that makes sense, and then we'll react to it, but that's not the most helpful answer. You're on mute, Dan, if you were, oh, sorry.
Yeah, so ultimately it is done at the development package stage. So when you come in with a development package, it would be assessed at that point. So that is the point at which if there is a commercial subdivision and it has the whole DP that comes in, that's when we would do the review, see whether or not it applies, and then that's when the requirement would come through. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, Rob, did you, if you want to come off mute and chat, we can, sure.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
I've worked on, the sign lighting code committee, worked with Tucson Water on some code changes, worked on a lot of different committees, implementing changes throughout city code-wise. I just feel like where we're at today, there's a lot of loose pieces that will really take staff a lot of time to entertain once plans do come in. Been working with MPA in a group. I've had a lot of questions we've wanted to have addressed to kind of button up some of the holes. One of them is large sites. How do you assess that? Another would be TCOs and C of Os. Lead times on just panels are running 28, 30, 40 weeks. Big panels, service entrance sections are running 52 weeks. There's a lot of issues still in the building world that we're dealing with. Now we're getting added another layer of components. And I'm all for conduit. I'm all for outlets. Totally makes sense. At some point I'll get an EV car. I'm not ready to do that yet. I mean, I'm definitely a proponent. So I just see a lot of issues on the implementation side and the review side that have kind of been left really to figure out later. And what's going to happen is when we do come in for those projects, to delay them really and take up more staff time. I just think there needs to be a little bit more diligence done on what needs to be done, where it needs to be done, how it's done, The outlets are all over the place. What is really required for an outlet? We've got a lot of questions about that. I just think that the entire thing needs to be kind of looked at a little bit finer, or it's just going to be a mess once we get in to try to implement it.
Thanks, Rob, for sharing. I appreciate you vocalizing that. And I think I can address a little bit of it. We talked to it. And I know we don't have 100% solution on how it's precisely going to work. And that's kind of true of everything we do. You put forward something, you implement it, and then you have to adjust to how you're going to operationalize it. We just issued some policy clarifications on ADU requirements because we found that we passed an ADU suite of how to do it, and then we had some feedback and we said, okay, how do we make this work? So we issued some policy clarifications. But going into this, I think I can reassure you of a couple things. One is reasonable intent to comply will mean that you've calculated your number of parking spaces and your type of use, and you've provided a plan set that provides that. This is not the type of thing that requires you to disperse outlets and charging stations throughout a parking lot. If you got 1,000 spaces, things can be clustered in ways that make sense. And so there's some, and it's tough to think that the city has common sense, but common sense can be applied to what you propose. And if it provides the number, if it provides the intent, that should be step one, and we'll be able to work on that. You brought up supply chain concerns and whether that could affect a TCO or a C of O. We've talked about that, and you acknowledge yourself that's probably not going to show up in the conduit or the outlet space, but perhaps in the station space, and or maybe other elements of kind of larger developments and what we're trying to provide. So we will be able to work with anybody who's designed it to the code. You're building it to the code, but you have a supply chain issue on being able to provide the service on the back end. Us holding your TCO doesn't provide any value because there's no faster path to the charging than going through the supply chain. So that'll be something that if it becomes a pain point on that's not going to be the type of thing we're going to hold your TCO for. As long as we know you've ordered the stuff and it's coming in the near future and it's going to get installed as soon as it's on site. The best we can ask for is it's installed as soon as it's on site. But holding back everything because of a supply chain issue, I don't see if it's a life safety health issue, that's one thing. This is the type of thing that if you've designed it right, we've approved it right, and all you're doing is waiting for some things to come in, we'll figure that out with you. I didn't see Dan or Acacia shaking their head violently no at me, so I think that I can stand behind that when that actually comes up in the real world. Okay, I see Karen, and I don't know if Zoom shows it in order, so I show Karen and then I show Alexa. So it's hands up. So go ahead, Karen.
Hi, Timothy. I've already spoken once, so I'll let Alexa go first, and then I can go after her if she likes, since she hasn't gone first.
Thanks, Karen. Alexa.
Thanks. Hi, everybody. My name's Alexa Scholl. I'm with the Tucson Metro Chamber, and we've been working with a group of stakeholders on this issue for quite a while and working with the city. I think really kind of my main point that I want to make, and we did submit a document in the survey, so hopefully you all had a chance to look at it. But we've talked quite a bit about how this is kind of preparing us for the future, and even in some of the materials from the city, we've seen that at this moment in time, we have kind of a low EV adoption rate here in the city of Tucson, and looking at the heat map of where those cars are located in terms of ownership, it's mostly not necessarily in the core of the city of Tucson, but up in other unincorporated areas of Pima County, like the foothills. So really what what we would like to see from our perspective is not changing any of the total percentages, but just moving on the retail side of things, that 5% stations to 5% outlets. I think right now from our conversations with our stakeholders who are business owners and developers in the community, they're not seeing a demand right now for actual stations. And there are some concerns about, as Rob alluded to, accessing that infrastructure right now with some of the delays that we're seeing. Also, there's been instances here locally of vandalism of stations, even with some of the city-owned charging stations. And so there's just a number of concerns about if stations are needed at this point in time. And so we'd rather see that used in outlets. And like I said, not changing any of the percentages, just moving that 5% stations to 5% outlets, we think would be a better investment of dollars. And especially since the intention of these code amendments is to be forward-looking, we think that would be a better use of everyone's time and money.
Thank you, Alexa. Good to see you again. Saw her yesterday at the event. So first of all, thanks for the comment. Thanks for being very precise in your recommendation. We did receive that letter, and that will be included in the input provided both to the manager and to the mayor and council. And we'll make note of your specific recommendation as well. So thank you. So Karen, I'm gonna use your grace again, and Fernanda has not, there you are. Fernanda has not spoken yet. So if we could go to Fernanda.
Hello. I just want to really reiterate what Alexa said. And looking in these three different categories, multifamily, office, and retail, retail is probably where people spend the least amount of time. And so, when it comes to who's going to get the most bang for their buck, probably retail is going to be the least of those. I really love the comment that Robert made. He said, giving these people that are developing these spaces the ability to choose outlets or stations so long as they have sufficient working ports. Like, I absolutely love that kind of flexibility. And another trend I'm really seeing is a lot of these different developers on their own are putting in electric charging stations or outlets because they see, they can assess on their own, like, wow, this is really an appropriate place for me to put an outlet or a station, just, gauging by, what's out here and who's using it and where I am. I'm near the highway, right? Like, and then also we're seeing a lot of like Tesla and different companies doing their own site evaluations and putting in stations in places where it makes sense for them. And the market's really driving that. So anyway, those are my comments. Oh, one more thing I wanted to say is, as far as the evaluation goes, do you think we'll have some sort of metrics for, success before the 1 year mark comes? Because I feel, that it can go either way, right? Like, you can evaluate it and you can say, wow, this isn't working. We need to be more stringent, or people aren't, buying incentivized enough to buy electric vehicles. Or you could say, oh, well, it's not working. Maybe we were too harsh. So, I mean, I think that in 1 year you can move forward and think you can go either way, whether it worked or you need to be harsher, you need to, scale back, right? So are we going to have some working group that's going to determine how we're going to evaluate it in 1 year and what it's going to mean when we get that data?
Thank you for those comments. And circling back on the metrics and measurement. So we will have metrics and measurements. We talked briefly about what some of those could be. I think there's value in us being a little more precise with that as we roll out the conversation. But I think this is also a space where we're going to rely on feedback from the development community and from business owners and multifamily housing unit owners on the effectiveness, so it by definition, I think, would be a group effort to evaluate it over this next year. So thank you for your comments. Back to Karen.
Thank you, Timothy. And I'd like to just make one proposal here, and happy to put this together as a potential recommendation for this group. But I think one thing, kind of based on the concerns in regards to retail buildings. I think there could be a very simple exception included to help address, I think, some of the concerns for the spaces and visibility. And what it would be is a ratio essentially of for spaces, it's like a 5:1 ratio for every instead of having 5 different level 2 chargers, you have 1 DC fast charger potentially. And there are a number of different local governments that have adopted this type of exception. And it essentially reads something such as the number of electric vehicle supply equipment installed in spaces may be reduced up to 5, provided that the building includes not less than 1 parking space equipped with an EV fast charger, or a DC fast charger in this case, not less than 1 EV ready space. So how this could help, right, is for the concern of having all of these additional level 2 chargers that may not be utilized in the same way, but maybe 1 DC fast charger could be more appropriate for some locations. So we just wanted to add that could be something to really help, I think, address especially larger retail spaces like Costco's or Walmart's, to help to ensure that where we're putting infrastructure is the most productive use case for what's being installed potentially. So that might be one potential additional fix here, or something that we can use to see after, when we all come back together in a year, right, to review what we've implemented, to see maybe this could be one way to help some of those larger retailers with the requirements. And would love to, within the year mark, to address some of the things like multifamily as well, to see what else is needed for other building types. I don't know if anyone has thoughts on that.
Thank you for your comment. And I know only enough to be dangerous. Is what you're suggesting distinct from what we are proposing, which is a level 3 charging counting toward 3 spaces or 3 stations? Is that a different conversation? You're on mute, Karen.
Sorry about that. I was looking at the wrong button. Yeah, I think it's similar. So if we want to, I mean, we could just keep it at this, but I did want to just suggest what other local governments have already included in terms of, and you could include this as a part of the language, a specific ratio, if you will. So hopefully it helps to provide some comfort so that retailers, instead of, having up to 3 different level 2 chargers, they can just have the 1 DC fast charger, and it has maybe a higher utilization rate than individual stations. But that would be just for a very kind of specific use case, I think, for some of the bigger box retail stores. But I think we would be also fine with, if you're considering what you have here on the slide, a ratio to of like a 3:1 versus a 5:1, that would work as well, just as fine. But I think the point of bringing this up is having this kind of ratio is very helpful for some of the bigger box retailers, so that they feel like they don't have to install a bunch of infrastructure that may not be utilized in this at the same rate as maybe 1 DC fast charger.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll go to Garrett, and then I've got a little bit of catch up in the chat. So Garrett, you're up.
Oh, thank you, Tim. And thank you, Dan, Corian, and Acacia for facilitating this meeting. My name is Garrett Weaver, and I am a concerned citizen and climate activist in Tucson. And first of all, I'd like to say that I'm happy that the city is looking at EV readiness. I appreciate the hard work that you are making towards this ordinance. And the proposed amendment is a step in the right direction. As part of this conversation, I think it would behoove us to consider the connection between energy, climate, and drought. Lake Mead is projected to get down to 22% of its full capacity by this year's end, while Lake Powell is expected to drop below 27%, according to estimates from the Federal Bureau of Reclamation, and now both sit at record lows. The city of Tucson has declared a climate emergency 2 years ago, and this is a great step. I think that things like staff time, seeking more alignment on stakeholder feedback, having diligence, exact percentages of outlets in conduit, current and voltage is going to be seen as kind of a pedantic concern by our future selves and our children when we're struggling with things like keeping cool and figuring out how we're going to get enough water. So we need to act on this on August 3rd and be aggressive on addressing climate change. Russell mentioned looking at electricity generation, and I think that and looking at making our electric grid carbon-free is absolutely needed as well. So I hope to see a vote on this ordinance soon, and thank you very much for your time.
Thank you for your comments, Garrett. I see your hand up, Oscar. Give me 1 second to catch up on chat, and then I'll come right to you. Corin put in the chat a response to Rob, just assuring him that these requirements would be evaluated at the same time as ADA requirements that exist. So we would stay within sort of a similar time frame. There's an additional product link that Benjamin has put in the chat about concerns over panel upgrades and electric use. Let's see, Acacia. Oh, letting me know that Fernanda's hand was up. Got to her. All right. Robert had a comment about agreeing the site should have flexibility and as long as there's sufficient working ports. And he's bringing up the flexibility between outlets and stations, which was brought up by other commenters as well. And then that those that have EVs have their own charging cable. So a kind of a theme about this outlets or ports, but the focus on conduit. Let's see, I'm gonna go to Oscar, and then Ben Bueller Garcia put in the chat that he would like to comment. So Oscar, let's go to you, and then we'll come to Ben Bueller Garcia.
Hi, good morning. Good morning, everyone. My name is Oscar Medina. I currently serve as a chapter chair for Sierra Club's Grand Canyon chapter. We're the largest environmental and conservation organization in the state of Arizona. We really support the city of Tucson and its EV readiness plan. One of the things that I'm here to just emphasize that air quality is really important. I think adopting these policies will enable the growth of electric vehicles, which means clean air. The reality is that EVs do not have tailpipe emissions, and they make them, EVs are the cleanest and safest choice to improve the air quality in our city. As a father who has a child that has respiratory issues, my son has asthma, he's 5 years old. I would love to see more electric vehicles on the highway. And I would like to also just share that I appreciate the standards that have been set, and how I'm thinking about how low these standards actually are when it comes to just implementation of conduit lines. We're not even asking for actual stations except in the retail section. But these are really just conduit lines. It's not like the charging stations are going to be up and ready in multifamily housing areas. So thank you very much for allowing me to speak today, and I'll pass it on.
Okay, thank you for being here and your comments, Oscar. Ben Bueller Garcia, are you able to come off mute?
Yes, thank you. Ben Bueller Garcia on behalf of the Arizona Multi-Housing Association. This discussion is focused a lot on things that are going to be forecasted decades down the road. EV adoption 2030 on down the line, using mostly national data, not Tucson local data. I just want to remind everyone that we live in a community with a 20% poverty rate. And the immediate crisis right now in Tucson has to do with housing affordability and affordable housing. 40% of the costs of building multifamily projects involve government requirements and regulations. Both the city's Housing Affordability Strategic Plan and the Pima County Affordable Housing Task Force recommendations all speak to the importance of reducing the regulatory costs of building new housing in our community. And if you look at the projects that are in the pipeline now through 2025, very, very few of them are within the city limits. So if you add the proposed source of income ordinance that's being considered as well, I'm afraid we're risking reducing the number of builders that want to build multifamily housing within the city limits to begin with. So I'd highly recommend that staff resists any pressure to increase the overall percentages. I think a focus on conduit is appropriate. I think that gives all the folks here what they need as far as what we need to do moving forward when the time comes and the market demands it. And just speaking to the affordable housing part of it, there is a local developer here who specializes in affordable housing projects. And because of interest rates, supply chain issues, construction, costs of construction materials, every one of his projects are underwater right now. They're not going to get built. And while we're talking down the line, I just want to remind folks that, you know, our priority also needs to remain focused on making sure people have a roof over their heads, not an EV charger in the home that they can't afford. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments. Let's see. Okay. And back in the chat, the conversation, oops, I clicked on the wrong place. The conversation about flexibility between outlets and stations continued. There was some support for that from both Fernanda and Alexa. I'm interpreting also as I scroll, just sort of a conversation around that. So we are capturing all that, and it sounded like there was at least you know, some folks sort of coalescing around an idea there. So I'm going to assure you that we will interpret that and present that feedback to the manager and to the council. So
Hi.
Okay, who's this?
Hi, this is David Giebert from the Tucson Electric Vehicle Association.
Okay, go ahead.
I just wanted to say that we basically support the plan. We'd like it to be even more, but we think that once a few stations are put in, the builders will understand that there is a demand. I agree with the points made by Sweep and Robert Vilacek in general and in many specifics. And I'm happy to hear the department giving accommodations to the builders that they wanted, that they know they're going to be accommodated for shortages, because it seems to me that was one of their bigger objections to the plan. And so I'm happy things are moving forward. I think once we just get started, things will become much clearer. And in a year or two, we'll really know what the demand is in Tucson. Thank you.
All right, thank you for your comments. I'd like to pick back up with Kevin James, if you're willing to come back on, because you make a great point about the metrics and measurements piece. We had, what we listed was measuring things that could be on the benefit side of the equation. You'd like to make the point that it should be on the cost side. So would you like to speak to that?
Yeah, just wanted to, we all love the benefits, just wanted to make sure we consider whatever we think the costs are, so we can make sure, you know, whatever the benefits we get, if it's, you know, whatever 500 more extra vehicles or something like that, that the costs are appropriate for whatever that benefit that we got is. And I don't know exactly what all the costs will be, but I'm sure that a lot of people in the city have already thought about some of this, and it sounds like the review process will be pretty collaborative over the next year or so anyway, so we'll all kind of get that figured out, but just wanted to make sure that was in everybody's head, and it probably already is.
Just thank you for articulating that, though. I think that was important and very valid. So appreciate you bringing that forward explicitly. So thank you. Thank you, Kevin. There's a comment in the chat telling a sort of a case study outside of Washington, D.C. from EV Jerry in the chat about the success of a EV charging station with DC fast chargers along the highway in Washington, D.C. So it's there in the chat for you to peruse. Benjamin has a comment about conduit. I've spoken to your comments in the chat for a bit, but if you would like to come back on, Benjamin, to speak your comment, that'd be great.
Yeah, am I muted still?
You're off. You're good.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, but basically that's sort of self-explanatory. I think the realtors are like, you know, okay, we'll put some conduit in, we're done. And my fear is that we will see exponential EV growth. We're actually a little ahead of the nation, has been pointed out, with EV adoption. And I think one of the big financial websites, Bloomberg's, pointed out the other day that when you get to that 5% sales in the US thing, that S curve just accelerates right through the roof. We've got proposals. Well, it's not even a proposal anymore. It's going to be legislation probably later today as part of that large inflation reduction package. Part of that is a $4,000 rebate on used EVs. They're going to be proliferating. Will the developers, if they've got their empty conduit and they get 2 new EV owners moving into their apartment complex next year, are they going to come out that week and put wire and outlets in? Yeah, I think the conduit is just a half solution. You need, at least a minimum amount of outlets that are all wired up and ready to go. That's basically it.
Thank you for that comment. Hand has come up from Robert.
I just wanted to follow up on the suggestion that seems to be agreeable to several people in the chat, that we formally allow flexibility between outlets and stations. I have a theory, as yet unproven, that charging outlets versus billable network stations will kind of go the way Wi-Fi did, where initially, when Wi-Fi was first invented, people tried to do subscription plans and charge a bunch of money for it. And coffee shops and restaurants found out that it was so cheap to do, they were better off just attracting customers with it. And today, we expect every building to have Wi-Fi as an amenity. Well, I think the EV charging will go the same way. If you're replenishing 36 miles a day, that's like $2 worth of electricity. So while I have this theory, I can't prove it yet, which is why I am in favor of total flexibility for the site to put in either simple, inexpensive outlets. NEMA 1450s are $50 at Home Depot versus, non-billable EVSEs stations started around $500, and the fancy network to billable ones are like $4,000. That I'd like to give the sites flexibility. Put in what you think you need. What I care as a driver is that I can charge, affordably and conveniently. And I don't think the city needs to dictate, whether they put in or how much do they put in of either. Not every EV driver has a portable charging cable that can just plug into a NEMA 1450, but if they don't, they should. So I'm fine with that. It would be nice if they had at least one J1772 station, just for those people who haven't got their portable charging cable yet. But let's give the builders some flexibility there. Do what they think they need in a most affordable way. If it's one $4,000 billable network charger versus 10 NEMA 1450s, I'm going to take the 10 NEMA 1450s every time. So what would it take to propose that formally? And then, the flip side of that is the 10% conduit and stuff like that is kind of silly. Let's make it 20% conduit across the board, and then give them flexibility as to whether they use an outlet or station. What do you think?
Thank you, Robert. So I think you can consider that officially commented. I'm about to take a risk here in a moment after we get Mr. Asher to speak, but I don't know that we're in a position to offer trade-offs, but I think we're in a position where we can consider the recommendation that I'm hearing from multiple voices, that some flexibility between station and outlets on a case-by-case basis, maybe with some safety net or safeguards. But I'm not saying that's what we're going to propose or recommend, but I'm going to take a don't call it a vote straw poll here in a moment from the folks on this call on an idea. So let's hear from Evie, Jerry, and then pause for a second, and I'll pose a question to you all, and you can answer in the chat. So Evie, Jerry.
Okay, thank you, Tim. I just wanted to share a little bit more about what I've seen in my travels. I'm now still with the Tucson Electric Vehicle Association as its vice president. And we're also doing a number of things with Pima Community College and setting up an EV orientation course using the TIVA human resources that we have to be the lead instructors or presenters. But the thought is that many times we're talking about these complexes, buildings and all, and we have plenty of them downtown, but somebody went ahead and converted a gas station. I think they put in 4 DC fast chargers, might have even been 6 with a waiting room. So it's in a location where people could show up once a week and power up their vehicles and you know, either shop nearby at a food co-op or do a number of things. Now, they also had in this area some DC fast chargers, one, the Chatamo and the CCS and Tesla superchargers you had to, you know, locate. But this is something that we should probably also look at when we talk about, oh, we got these apartment complex, and sometimes the apartment complexes can support something like a DC fast charger held by a private individual or maybe even subsidized by the city. And with the new legislation that's coming in, you know, for setting up charging stations, that may be something that the city will be looking at, or this committee. And I just think it's just grand because some supermarkets are actually putting in DC fast charging where people will come in and they'll shop and they'll come back out and their week's worth of, you know, juice is handled. They're all set. So we've got many other different sides rather than just one DC fast charger for, you know, an apartment complex, or what do we do for people that don't have access to something. One of the ideas again is that they can go once a week and get a DC fast charge as needed. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. All right, here's the dangerous part of the meeting. So in the chat, I'm going to pose a statement, which is not a proposal. It's not the official position of the city. It's not been endorsed by the manager or the mayor and council. It has no bearing. It has no legal standing. It has no value other than I just want to ask a question and get your feedback. With all of that preamble, I'm specifically focusing on, under the retail column, we have the 5% requirement for stations and 0 for outlets. And I'm not talking about changing the total number at this point or any of that, but it sounded like from multiple perspectives, there was value potentially in some flexibility between stations and outlets, but I'm going to caveat it with that the stations we have to have a basement on stations, in my opinion, you know, that there has to be at least some number, whether it's 1, 3, whatever, depending on things. I don't have the details. But my question for you is are you more likely or less likely to support the city manager's recommendation if under retail there was flexibility provided between outlets and stations within that 5%? So I'm focused on one element. I'm focused on your feedback of whether you're more or less likely to support the overall thing if there was flexibility between stations and outlets.
I have a quick follow-up question, just for clarification. So are you saying that the multifamily and office would stay as is, and the flexibility would be on the retail side for the 5%, outlet stations. There'd be flexibility there.
That's what I'm saying. And just to be specific, I was not hearing people saying that, what I was hearing is that there was more risk, if you will, on a station than an outlet. There's certainly more costs on a station than an outlet. So I'm saying only retail, only because right now we're saying 5% stations. I know some of you might be wanting to do that for all three categories. That's not my question. My question is, for the 5% on stations in retail, would you be more likely to support this if there was flexibility there? And I hear, for those of you that are saying, yes, that flexibility should be on all sites, we've got your comment noted. I'm not agreeing or disagreeing, but I wanted to just take the pulse from all the different perspectives on this call, which is only one call of many. So it's only limited data. And of course, my entire team is running scared, crying, saying they're not crying, but they're concerned for my future well-being and my future employment for doing this here with you all.
I think you should reach for a cat.
If I had a cat, somebody tossed me a cat. No, I'm just kidding. Oh, thank you, Benjamin. I'm just gonna, oh, and it's a cute cat giving itself a bath. All right, so while I'm hanging out here on my limb, I appreciate you all indulging that and not using it later to eviscerate me in public or at the mayor and council by doing so. This is why we do it. And it's also being recorded. So all of my commentary about my vulnerability and risk taking is also now public record. So it's all good. But when I hear something that is maybe at least of value to present, especially since I'm hearing and seeing it, I think, at least in my opinion, from multiple perspectives. So I want to make sure that I think there's value there. So, all right, we are at 10:21. We got about 9 minutes left. I'm going to go into last round of comments. If you all, if you have any, if not, I think we've had some good discussion here. But let's go into Alexa. Your hand's up.
I just wanted to say thank you for this opportunity to provide feedback and for opening the survey earlier this week. And Tim, I appreciate your candor and throwing ideas out with the caveat that you can't guarantee anything, but it's nice to hear those kind of proposals and suggestions instead of just you hearing us and then not knowing kind of what you're thinking and potentially proposing to the manager and mayor and council. So I appreciate your time today, and I'm looking forward to kind of what happens with the proposal moving forward.
Thank you for that, and thanks for being here. Any other final comments? All right. One last view of your cat, Benjamin. I need one last view of your cat. Okay, thank you. I feel better. I feel pretty good. All right, I'm gonna wrap things up with you, give you a few minutes back to your day. Thanks for being with us for this year and a half. Many of you have been engaged through the multiple meetings and discussions, but especially this last week and this call today to try to get to a place where we all feel as best as we can about this next step that we're going to put in front of the mayor and council. So with that, I bid you all a happy Friday and a great weekend ahead.
Thank you.
Take care all. And Dan and Acacia and Corin, do we want to convene on a